Being without a government for 2.5 years has been quite difficult for us. We're stuck. The consequences in the terms of our economy, which is in decline, of our health service, which is struggling, of our education service, which, as noble lords have pointed out, requires significant development, our past, which is not being dealt with in a coherent and constructive way. These are all well known. My lords, there seems to be little evidence that the current negotiations are going to produce an executive. We don't know what's being discussed at these purported negotiations. The signals are profoundly depressing. The Secretary of State told us yesterday they've had 150 meetings, but they couldn't have a glass of wine together. There are hundreds of issues on which the parties could unite in the common good. There is urgent need for actions which could benefit our whole community and wouldn't be contentious. And such actions will begin to heal some of the harm which has been done from the past 2.5 years, when so much trust has been eroded in our democracy. Sinn Féin continued publicly to support the deeply anti-democratic campaign of murder by the Provisional IRA. It is deeply resented, not just by unionism. And in private conversations, we are receiving no assurances of any kind. The noble Lord Morrow said nothing is coming. My Lord, what happened yesterday in the other place was reminiscent of colonial days. Yes. The people of Northern Ireland are being denied the right which the law accords them to make their own decisions on devolved matters. Through the amendments introduced in the other place yesterday, they have driven a coach and horses through the Good Friday Agreement, which I would remind noble lords is an international treaty binding the United Kingdom. In addition to this, the other place has given effect to the demands of Sinn Féin, and by so doing have taken a decision against the DUP. I mean, there are those who are now saying that the DUP are very happy about this because they won't have to deal with these two issues. I have not heard noble colleagues here or elsewhere express that view. In imposing a deadline of the 21st of October for the negotiations to succeed, in the absence of which government will have to act in accordance with this bill, the other place has taken away from the people of Northern Ireland their right to make their own decisions about matters which in law are devolved to them. They have acted in a partisan manner. Now, it's not that devolved powers have been withdrawn from Northern Ireland. They will exist in parallel with this bill. In continuing to present this bill, and of course government could withdraw it, they have made it much more unlikely that Sinn Féin will come to the table with open hearts and willing minds. They don't need to do so. They can just sit and wait until the members of the other place do their work for them. As a consequence, I think, of the other place passing these amendments, Sinn Féin don't have to engage in democracy to achieve their ends. They can just say, we refuse to engage, and look what happens. My Lords, in 1967, the Northern Ireland Parliament voted against embracing the Abortion Act. In 2016, the Northern Ireland Assembly, as your noble Lords have heard today, voted by a clear majority not to change our law in any way. My Lords, the Government has consistently given assurances to the people of Northern Ireland that devolution provisions will be respected. On 30th of October last, I pointed out that most recently in June, the noble Lord O'Shaughnessy had given me an assurance that the intention of the Government and the NIO is to restore a power-sharing agreement and arrangement so that it will be up to the people of Northern Ireland and their elected officials to decide on abortion policy. In October 2018, the noble Lord the Minister said this: "As someone who comes from part of the kingdom which has a fully functioning devolved government, I stress again that these decisions must be taken by the devolved administration in the north of Ireland. There is no point in pretending we can usurp democracy in that fashion, simply because devolution is not to our liking. Devolution must function even when it's not as we would like to see it, but rather how it must be." And as the noble Lord Alton said, until last week, we didn't know what would be in this amendment. We had intimations it might be coming. The first we saw of the Creasy Amendment was on Thursday morning last. Within hours, it had been passed by the House of Commons. The expectation was that the Speaker would do the right thing, that he would exclude it because it was outside the scope of the bill. The transparent inappropriateness of this was further underlined by the fact that, entirely consistent with the vote by the democratically elected Northern Ireland Assembly in 2016, 100% of our MPs voted against the provision. It was imposed on us by over 300 MPs who have neither consulted us and who do not represent us. My Lords, if we meddle in the affairs of Northern Ireland in this heedless way, if we don't object to the House of Commons introducing clauses which have nothing to do with the bill before the House, if we accept that government has lost control of Parliament, if Parliament allows one person, the Speaker of the other place, to make his own decisions about what can and can't become law, without having regard to international treaty obligations, such as those which derive from the Good Friday Agreement, human rights law, and even the domestic law of the United Kingdom, we are surrendering our democracy and our much-cherished constitution. For Northern Ireland, with 17 MPs and a chamber of 600 plus, there is no democracy now. Devolution has gone in effect on those occasions on which Parliament decides it wishes to act against it. My Lords, the Select Committee on the Constitution of your Lordship's House, in a paper published just 9 days ago, entitled The Legislative Process, the Passage of Bills Through Parliament, I'm awfully sorry, but could I ask for a glass of water? Stated at paragraph 39, we regret that legislation relating to Northern Ireland has regularly been fast-tracked. This has become common not just for bills which might be required to address urgent or unforeseen problems, but for routine and predictable matters. The political stalemate in Northern Ireland has led to the absence of a functioning executive and a democratic deficit. Fast-tracking bills relating to Northern Ireland reduces further the scrutiny these measures should receive. Routinely fast-tracking in these ways is unacceptable, unsustainable, and should only be used for urgent matters. My Lords, I have no doubt that the ultimate purpose of these amendments is to change Northern Ireland and UK law by decriminalising abortion. I know that many of your Lordships will have a different view on abortion from me, and I accept that. That's not actually the point today. Clause 9 of the bill would mean that abortion would cease to be subject to any penalty in all circumstances. This means that any baby at any stage of gestation, right up to birth, could be aborted without penalty. As the noble Lord Alton said, there is no human right to kill unborn babies. I believe, as do hundreds of thousands of others, that human life exists from the moment of conception and that it should be protected at all times. And even those who are pro-choice are now beginning to accept that abortion is about killing babies. My Lords, if you're 3 months pregnant or 5 months pregnant and you go for a scan, the radiographer does not say to you, that's your fetus, or that's your embryo. They say to you, that is your baby. My Lords, when I lost my baby as a consequence of a bomb explosion, the doctor who stood at the end of my bed did not say to me, your pregnancy is over. He said to me, your baby is dead. My Lords, I want to just say a word to the noble Baroness Harris, and I want to reassure her that neither I nor hundreds of thousands of people in Northern Ireland feel oppressed or downtrodden or deprived of equality. Far from it. We think that our law brings freedom to mothers and to their children. We seek to support them. My Lords, I spoke in Oxford just a couple of weeks ago on freedom of conscience, and at the end of it, a woman came up to me and she said she had carried very recently a baby who had Down syndrome, and at each of her prenatal visits, the doctor said to her, you know, it would be much easier, you could have an abortion, you should have an abortion. It was a constant message right through her pregnancy, a time, my Lords, when women are most vulnerable. Let's be very clear. It would change the law in England and Wales, as the member for Walthamstow-Stead in the other place in June last year. She said, we would like to repeal sections 58 and 59 of the OAPA, the Offence Against Persons Act. These are the penalty provisions. So this clause will override not just the expressed will of the last democratically elected Northern Ireland Assembly, but the deliberations of this Parliament. My Lords, I don't actually believe that those who voted as they did in the other place yesterday really intended to abolish any penalty for unlawful abortion in the UK, yet that would be the effect. If we decriminalise abortion, and that is what this amendment seeks to do, we will make abortion available up to birth. My Lords, I don't know how many of you have known the beauty and the terror of the moment of birth, the moment when a new soul, a beautiful little baby, comes into the world. It is a moment of absolute wonder. I know that there are occasions when women don't want to carry their babies to term, but we need to be very clear that abortion is not a painless, clean medical process. A baby will be either killed in the womb through medication, or it will have poison injected into its heart so that it's born dead, or it might just be born alive, as 30 babies are, an average of 30 babies each year in England and Wales, and left to die. In that brave new world, my Lords, there will be fewer and fewer children with disabilities. They do not merit the right to life. They will have no protection, according to this bill currently before your Lordship's House. Yet we know that while children may be born with disabilities, that is not the sum total of the reality of their existence. They deserve more than to be defined by their disability. In the UK, my Lords, we now abort children because, in the England and Wales, we abort children because they are the wrong sex. We have proof of it. Because they have eminently curable conditions like club feet and cleft palates. In effect, my Lords, we have abortion on demand up to 24 weeks. We will have abortion to birth. My Lords, what sort of civilization is this, which countenances the killing of defenceless unborn babies in the place where they should be safest, the mother's womb? And what sort of civilization does this right up to the moment when a baby is born? My Lords, to revert to parliamentary procedure, there has been no white paper, no green paper, no consideration of the impact of the provision, no consultation, no explanatory memorandum from the member for Walthamstow, no consideration of conflicting current legislative measures, no provision even for this to be done with proper parliamentary procedure through both Houses of Parliament, rather than a statutory instrument subject only to negative resolution, which is all that is required, the least accountable form of legislation. There will be no discussion in either chamber of where medical science is in relation to the life of the unborn child, no consideration of the pain which we know unborn babies suffer when they're aborted, no thought of what we're saying as a people when we force this measure through at the behest of an unelected, unknown committee operating under a complaints procedure contained in a protocol to a convention. My Lords, the European Court of Human Rights has repeatedly stated that states have a margin of appreciation in these matters. We have the right not to do this. We should not do it. And yet, this is what the other place has determined will dictate our future law. Not proper parliamentary process, not even decisions influenced by the finest legal minds in the country, making decisions in our Supreme Court, with all the protections afforded by our resolute application of the rule of law. My Lords, this is profoundly and fundamentally wrong, that we should agree to consent to the disposal of human life before birth by means of this measure, which was designed only to extend the period for forming an executive in Northern Ireland until the 21st of October, and to grant powers to the Secretary of State to extend the period to 13th of January 2020. My Lords, we must reject this in committee, because if we don't, Northern Ireland will have had abortion foisted on it at a time of political crisis by a parliament of a country which has some responsibility for what happened in the past. My Lords, there are those who are seeking to inflict on us more troubles. We have seen the bombing attempts. We have seen the problems most recently last night at bonfires, because we're approaching the 12th of July. Environmental problems, but nevertheless they resulted in rather more serious problems. My Lords, there are still many of us who live in fear, and it's not an irrational fear. We have a huge problem of marginalised, impoverished, deprived people who live in conditions which are pretty bleak, and where the rule of the terrorist still operates. Be under no illusion, the rule of the terrorist still operates in Northern Ireland. My Lords, It seems to me that despite the best efforts of the noble Lord the Minister and of all those concerned, government has stood by and done very little for the past 2.5 years. It will be worse if we acquiesce in this travesty of a bill containing such a clause, which will impose abortion on demand on a people who have repeatedly said they do not want it.